All right. Good morning to everybody. Today we are going to discuss Nagarjuna. Now, in our discussion of Nagarjuna up to this point, we have covered the basic background of Nagarjuna, and today I would like to discuss in particular the Dhamma theory or Dharma theory, Dharmavada, which is very important in understanding Nagarjuna. Particularly it is important for us to understand what Nagarjuna is doing in this work. And not only even now, even at the very beginning, there were some issues about it. Earlier I referred to Buddhapalita and Bhava Viveka, who may have lived roughly 3-4 centuries after Nagarjuna. And they seem to be representing, some kind of ongoing tradition of interpretation. But among these two interpreters, there was also lack of agreement on to whom Nagarjuna addressing in this very important work. Mula Madhyamika Karika. Now, there must be an audience in the mind of the author when, the author is criticizing these views. Now, whose views are they? That's the important question. Now, general understanding was that Nagarjuna was responding to, not to the Buddhist tradition, but to other traditions. Now we know that in India, of course, there are many religious and philosophical traditions, and particularly what we call Shat Darshana. Shat Darshana, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Purvamimamsa, Uttaramimamsa. Now these, particularly these traditions were developed based on the Vedic philosophy, organizing these Vedic philosophical ideas more systematic into more systematic structures. Now, Shat Darshana, what we call 6 philosophical traditions, were basically so we have Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Samkhya, Yoga, and Purva Mimamsa and Uttaramimamsa. Now these are called Shat Darshanas, or 6 philosophical traditions. Now these 6 philosophical traditions belong to the Brahmanic, Vedic tradition. In fact, these philosophical traditions emerge in India in response to particularly the Buddhist and also Jaina philosophical influence, because Jainas and Buddhists came up with very sophisticated philosophical ideas, and even at the stage of early Buddhist, the early Buddhist discourses, and Jainism is also. Now, the Brahmins felt the need to structure, reorganize, and present their views in more intellectual manner, going beyond the rites and rituals. So there was that need. So you can see that in the Indian tradition, these systems came up. Of course, they are being developed subsequently. Even today, the works are being written on these systems. Basically, Nyaya, Vaisheshika go together, Sankhya and Yoga go together, Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa go together. Nyaya subsequently developed to be the Indian Brahmanic logical system. And then Vaisheshika is basically their analysis of reality. So it's a kind of atomism. And then Sankhya and Yoga. Sankhya analyzes reality into Prakriti and Purusha. And Yoga presents a system of practice. Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. Mimamsa means knowledge. Purva Mimamsa means basically dealing with ritual aspect of Vedic religion and try to justify and give intellectual, the justification for yajna, particularly the sacrifice. And then Uttara Mimamsa is what is called Vedanta. Vedanta refers to basically the Upanishadic philosophy. Now these are very powerful. Now Uttara Mimamsa, which is called Vedanta. Vedanta means Veda Anta, the end of Veda or culmination of Veda. So the perfection of Veda, which refers to Upanishads. In fact, what was developed by Shankaracharya by around 8th and 9th centuries caused a lot of damage to Buddhism and ultimately causing Buddhism to disappear from its birthplace. So, these 6 philosophical traditions are very, very important. Now, what happened was in the Indian tradition, now when the Buddhist philosophical criticism and attacks come, then the Brahmin philosopher will come up and answer. And they kind of, they defeat the Buddhist. And then again the Buddhist will come up and defeat Brahmins. So it was going, the back and forth like this in the Indian tradition. In the Indian history, of course, after Shankaracharya's attack, it doesn't seem that Buddhism could really come up again. So that's why it was, it disappeared from India. However, now when you look at Nagarjuna's the criticism and Nagarjuna's powerful logical system, it was understood that Nagarjuna was criticizing, Nagarjuna was attacking these Brahmanic philosophical systems. Of course, Brahmanic philosophical systems and other philosophical systems. And particularly about causation, they had, the various views. Like they had what is called the belief that the cause and effect, cause is included in the effect, or effect is included in the cause. In that manner, there was a lot of philosophical discussions. Now, among these discussions, one basic view was Sat Karyavad, and then another view is Asat Karyavad. Sat Karyavad, Asat Karyavad. Karya means effect. Now there are two concepts, Karya, Karana. Karana means cause. Karya means effect. So, Karya, Karana. Sat Karya Vada presented the idea that karya is, the effect is in the cause. So Satkaryavada. Sat means present, Karya means effect. The effect is present in the cause. And then the second view is Asatkaryavada, effect is not present in the cause. Now these are, some ideas trying to understand the causality, causal relationship. What is the relationship between cause and effect? When you look at cause and effect, how to really account for it. Then one idea was like when you look at the cause and then subsequently you see the effect. Now, how does cause produce effect? So one idea was to say that the effect is in some form within the cause. Now, if you take the seed, you take mango seed, and then from mango seed, a mango plant comes up. Now, the question you can ask is, where was the plant? And then finally you see a huge tree coming up, and then how to explain that? Now, mango seed is of course a little large, but if you take banyan seed is such a small thing. But then from such small thing, how can you have such a huge banyan tree coming? So, how to understand the causal relationship? Where was the effect? So, there were a lot of theories about these things. People were trying to understand. Now, causality is a central conception of Nagarjuna. When I will be discussing with you next that subject, Pratitya Samutpada. Now, basically, causality is the doctrine of, the cause and effect. Now, the cause and effect have been described in many different manners. The Pratitya Samutpada is the Buddhist concept of causality, okay? Now, sometimes people do not understand this very clearly, but we need to understand it clearly. So, Pratitya Samutpada is I would emphasize the Buddhist explanation of causality. But otherwise, causality is a general concept. Causality is a general concept believed by everybody. Because cause and effect relationship is what it is. Like if you take even the theism, the creation of God, there is a cause and effect. God is the cause, effect is the world. So there is a causal relationship. And then Satkaryavada is causal theory. Asatkaryavada is causal theory, right? And then in Buddhism, because sometimes we say that Pratitya Samutpada is the causal theory. Actually, no, Pratitya Samutpada is the Buddhist, or how the Buddhist would present the cause and effect relationship is the Pratitya Samutpada. Okay? The other people don't present it in that manner. So the concept of Pratitya Samutpada is how the Buddhism would present the concept of causality. But then there are other things, okay? So, Satkaryavada and Asatkaryavada. These speculations arose because, trying to understand, how the cause and effect are related. Now, then finally people came into something like, there must be some very special power belonging to the cause which makes it competent capable to produce the effect. Now, what is this power, Shakti? Some kind of mysterious thing, So that is how they explained it. So the cause has this very mysterious power. So that is one way to, when you say Satkaryavada, Karya is Sat, present in the cause, or Karya is not present in. Now, when the people notice the difficulties of holding Satkaryavada, then they would some people went into Asatkaryavada. But Buddhism rejects all these things. Now you remember in Achelakassapa Sutta in the Sanyutta Nikaya, the Achelakassapa puts this series of questions to the Buddha, somewhat, the reminiscent of, this whole process. Achelakassapa has these questions to the Buddha. One is, Sayam Katan Dukkham. Then Sayam Karam Param Karam. Now you see here 4 different positions. Sayankatan Dukkham, Parakatan Dukkham, Sayankatancha, Parakatancha Dukkham, Asayankarang, Aparankarang, Adicca Samuppannan Dukkham. So there are these 4 positions. Sayam Katam Dukkham, whether the dukkha is self-brought, whether the dukkha is done by oneself, Sayang. And the opposite of Sayang is Para. Sayankatan Dukkham. So then the Parakatan Dukkham. Para means other. Whether the suffering is done by oneself or whether suffering is done by other. Then the third position is a combination of 1 and 2. Sayankatancha, Parakatancha Dukkham. So it is a combination. And then the 4th position is Asayankarang, Aparankarang, neither done by oneself nor done by other, but Adhicca Samuppannan Dukkham. Adhicca Samuppanna means arisen. Adhicca Samuppanna means arisen accidentally, without any reason, for no reason. Now you see, these were the positions held by different people. When you say Sayankatan Dukkham, and some people go to the opposite of Parakatan Dukkham, some people combine both, and some people rejecting the whole Sayankatam, Parakatan type of conceptualization and go to hold the view that, the things happen out of no reason. Now, Buddha rejected all these things. Now, you remember in my last discussion, of course, we have Nagarjuna referring to these positions. We have Nagarjuna referring to these positions because in the very beginning of Nagarjuna's work, I will show you that Nagarjuna refers to these 4 positions. Swayankrutang, Parakrutang, Ubhe, Ahetutah, for no reasons. So these 4 positions. Now, there is an understanding that Nagarjuna was responding to these various Indian philosophical traditions because they were there. These were the basic theories. However, this is a matter of historical understanding. When I say it's a matter of historical understanding, now, when you look out, superficially, you can see that because there were so many theories of the conditionality or the causation. So maybe Nagarjuna was responding to this causation theorist. Now, that's the superficial understanding. However, when we examine very closely, we can see that in fact, Nagarjuna was not really responding to these theories. Nagarjuna was responding to some other group of people. So, initially, why I say this is, even Buddha Bhava Viveka, thought that, Nagarjuna was responding to these different philosophical traditions of India. Now, that is why Bhava Viveka held that Nagarjuna should, now, if Nagarjuna doesn't accept Sayankatan Dukkhang or Swatah Utpatti, in Sanskrit we use the word Swatah Utpatti, Sayankatan Dukkhang or Swatah Utpatti, same thing as Sayankatan. Utpatti means rising, birth. Swatah Utpatti, rising from oneself. Bhava Viveka held that Nagarjuna should give arguments against this, his own independent arguments. Now, this is why Bhava Viveka is described as a Swatantrika philosopher. But then he had the understanding, or misunderstanding that Nagarjuna was responding to this Samkhya, Yoga, and, these Shaddarshanas. However, it is not the case. It is not the case because when we look carefully, we can see that Nagarjuna was not responding to these people. Nagarjuna was responding to his own Buddhist brethren. So the earlier scholars held that Nagarjuna was critiquing the views held by such non-Buddhist schools in India as Samkhya, Puramimamsa, etc. Even Bhava Viveka, who presented Swatantrika interpretation of Nagarjuna, held this view. Presently, however, scholars in general believe that Nagarjuna is responding not to Indian philosophers in general, but specifically to his own Buddhist brethren who held Dharma theory. This, however, does not mean that Nagarjuna's arguments have applicability beyond Buddhist scholastic schools. Of course, the arguments presented by Nagarjuna could be applicable to these some of these 6 philosophical systems, could be, but it doesn't seem that these systems were in Nagarjuna's mind when he was writing this text, because as I said, this is a matter of understanding text in its historical context. Okay? Now, so therefore that is very important, because unless we understand the context, we do not understand the text. Now, this is a very famous statement. We talked about the text. A text in context. What do you mean by that? A text in context. Any text has to be understood in a context, because ultimately it can be the book, or it can be a painting, or anything, or any kind of text has to be understood in a particular context. Now, if you look at the picture here, now it is hanging on the wall. So, it has some purpose. Suppose, this same frame, you can go and make use of for a moment for some other purpose, right? You want some paperweight. So you can use this and, keep your other papers going around. Now, then, of course, it serves as the paperweight, not as a work of art. Now, when you are displaying it here like this, it's a work of art for people to see. But there can be many other uses of that. So this is what is called the text in context. Now, historically also, people don't write books for nothing. So you have some idea why you are writing this text. So that context, historical context, have to be understood very clearly. So this whole idea has some very important thing, namely that we need to understand the historical context in order to understand what Nagarjuna is doing. I say this very important because if you don't understand exactly to what Nagarjuna is responding to, then you tend to misinterpret him, right? Because you don't know why he is critiquing. You don't know who he is critiquing, right? Then of course you tend to. So therefore this, the basic idea, his views could be used to critique other, like Shaddarshana views also, but that doesn't seem to be what Nagarjuna had in his mind when he was writing this text. What he had in his mind was his own Buddhist, the people. So in that sense, you can see that this exercise makes us to see the history of Buddhism anew. Because usually, popularly, we say Nagarjuna is a Mahayanist. Okay? Now, when you look at the book, it's very interesting to see that there is absolutely nothing Mahayana about Mula Madhyamika Karika. No even Mahayana concept. Of course, Nagarjuna's other books are there. In some books, he talks about Bodhisattva and all that. But nothing absolutely in Mula Madhyamika Karika. Only thing he refers to is Mahakachanagotta Sutta, which is found in Sanyutta Nikaya, Nidanavagga, and also Sanyutta Agama in Chinese translation. So some of these very important suttas may have, we discussed this yesterday also, within different Nikayas, within different sects, there may have been certain differences in their text. But I would imagine that these differences are very minor, really. In larger majority, they agreed with all the basic discourses. So, Kachayanagotta Sutta is, it appears to be a universally accepted discourse by all Buddhist schools. So, Nagarjuna refers only to that. So, that is not a Mahayana Sutra. Nagarjuna doesn't refer to Mahayana Sutras, okay? In Mula Madhyamika Karika, you don't find Lankavatara, Saddharma Pundarika, or anything like that. Then it is a matter of really understanding who is Nagarjuna. Actually, this well-known author, A.K. Warder, wrote a very interesting article a long time ago, Is Nagarjuna a Mahayanist? So the title of maybe you can locate it in perhaps in the web. Is Nagarjuna a Mahayanist? Now, this question is a very interesting thing because usually he is considered to be the one who started the Mahayana tradition. But on the other hand, the question whether he is a Mahayanist. So this shows the need for us to look at the Buddhist history from a new point of view. Because traditionally it's true, okay, Nagarjuna is a Mahayanist. But then when you look from the major work, Mula Madhyamika Karika, there is no any evidence for you to say that Nagarjuna was a Mahayanist. Okay? So now in that sense, so now what it means is Nagarjuna seems to be identifying himself with, with the stage of Buddhism where these, sharp divisions were not there, right? He may have identified. Of course, subsequently Nagarjuna was made to be the originator of Mahayana. Nagarjuna really clearly have criticism of the Nikayas and then how they responded to certain Dharma debates. But although he had all these things, still maybe the Mahayana proper, as we are talking today, was still emerging. So the interesting thing is, what is Nagarjuna doing? Now, the kind of interpretation I want to present to you in this course of discussions is actually Nagarjuna's entire effort can be located within Buddhist soteriology, Buddhist path to Nirvana. So it can be located, but of course that we will discuss subsequently. So this is basically the background and the basic understanding what Nagarjuna is doing. So it accepted today that Nagarjuna is not responding to these other, the Indian Brahmanical systems, but he was responding to basically the the Buddhist themselves. Now the question is, what is Dharma theory? Why Dharma theory? Now, if you read Nagarjuna carefully, you can see that the main thing Nagarjuna attacks in his Mula Madhyamika Karika is what is called the concept of Swabhava. Concept of Swabhava. Swabhava, one's ownness. Swabhava. Bhava means nature or ness. Bhava. Swabhava means one's own nature. So you can say one's own ness. That's not very good English. So you can also say one's own nature. So this is the main idea that Nagarjuna attacks in his Mula Madhyamika Karika. This is the main idea that he attacks, one's own nature or one's ownness, Swabhava. Now, what is the connection between Dhamma theory and Swabhava? Now, Dharma, according to Nagarjuna, is that which has Swabhava. Now, the realities analyzed into dharmas, dharmas are explained according to Swabhava. Now, this is the connection. Okay? Now, realities analyzed into dharmas, and then answering the question, what is dharma? Then you answer the question, what is dharma is, what has Swabhava is, what is dharma. Okay, this is basically which Nagarjuna comments, critiques in his Mula Madhyamika Karika. Now, in order to understand this concept Swabhava, and then how dharma has been defined in terms of Swabhava, so we need to understand the Dharma theory in general. So I will be discussing with you the basic aspects of Dharma theory, because this is the main philosophical concept that Nagarjuna considers to be the most harmful. Now, the interesting thing is, Nagarjuna uses here this the development. Dharma theory was developed by the Buddhist Nikayas. So the manner that theory was developed and the assumptions that were put into this theory, Nagarjuna found were very harmful. So therefore he thought that he should critique it. So therefore Dharma theory is very important for us to understand Nagarjuna properly. From Dharma theory, of course, the main concept is Dharma theory has its Swabhava. The term Dharma or Dhamma in Pali is a widely used term in early discourses. Basically, it refers to the teaching of the Buddha as the second among the Noble Triple Gem. Now, actually when we use the word Dhamma, Dhamma is a very important term in the doctrine. We know that Buddha Dhamma Sangha, so Dhamma is the doctrine. Now, if you look at, for example, Pali Text Society Dictionary under Dhamma, you will be able to see how many uses are there in the Pali canon of concept of Dhamma. So there are so many uses. Dhamma can be used to practically for anything. We are talking about the Dhamma as Navalokuttara Dhamma, as something very great. And also we talk about Vanchaka Dharma, deceiving things. Now, if you take Navalokuttara Dhamma and Vanchaka Dhamma, both are two different things. And so you can see that Dhamma is used in many different, in a vast range of things. So basically Dhamma is a very popular concept. In the discourses, Dhamma occurs to refer to all constructed and unconstructed, sankhata and asankhata phenomena, including nirvana. Now, in the discourses, if you take Dhamma, Dhamma refers to both sankhata, asankhata, constructed and unconstructed phenomena. In the Dhammapada, you have three stanzas. Sabbe sankhara dukkhati yada panyaya passati, and so on. Sabbe sankhara dukkhati, sabbe sankhara anicchati, sabbe sankhara dukkhati, and then the third one you have sabbe dhamma anattati. Now, it is an important question why in the first two things sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha, but when it comes to anatta, Buddha using the term sabbe dhamma anatta. Now, the reason there is Dhammas were considered to be including both sankhata and asankhata. Asankhata means unconstructed, which means nirvana. Now, if you use the word sabbe dhamma anicca, then you have to include nirvana also in the anicca things. Sabbe dhamma dukkha, then you have to include nirvana also in that. But which you cannot do. So, sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha, but sabbe dhamma anatta. All the dharmas, now including nirvana, both sankhata and asankhata. Now, this gives a very important clue to understand the subsequent development. So, when you take anatta, even nirvana is anatta. In Buddhism, there is nothing that is not anatta. So, everything comes under anatta because nothing has atta nature. Now, if you understand that, I would say that one principle is enough to understand Nagarjuna. Why he goes on, critiquing all these things is ultimately, Nagarjuna is emphasizing everything is anatma. Everything is anatma. Only thing is, the Nagarjuna does not use the concept of anatma, he is using the concept of swabhava. Now, the question is why he doesn't use the concept of anatta, which was taught by the Buddha and which was in the discourses, why he comes up to swabhava. Okay. Now, this is something very interesting. In the history of Buddhism, we can see that when the Buddha was teaching his Dhamma in the 6th century BCE in India, he was talking to a society in which people were believing in Atma, right? Because it was basically a society molded according to the Brahmanic views. In the Brahmanic system, the concept of Atma was the central theme, Atman Brahman. Ultimately, they believe that each individual Atma goes and intermingles with Brahman, and that is the moksha. So, this whole thing was presented in terms of Atma. So, the early discourses, you have the concept of anatma, because Buddha was responding to the concept of Atma. Right? So, that is the historical thing. So, because the whole issue was understood to be Atma, Buddha had to respond to that. And Buddha saw that Atma is considered to be the individual Atma. That is the basis, according to the Buddha, the basis or the foundation of our craving to ourselves. Now, according to Buddhism, tanha has to be eradicated. Tanha has to be gotten rid of. And tanha can't be gotten rid of till you have Atma view, because it is on your Atma, it is based on your Atma that you have your tanha. So tanha cannot be removed unless you remove the concept of Atma, that there is something called permanent and everlasting, something called I, or then you have mind. That is clear, you know it. So now Buddha had to use the word Atma for that. However, Nagarjuna's situation was different. Nagarjuna's situation is that he is addressing, as I said, addressing his own Buddhist brothers and sisters. Now they are all accept Anatmavada. All accept Anatmavada. There is no question about it. Even Pudgalavadins, we find in Kathavattupakarana, they accept Anatma. So there is no debate about that. So all the Buddhists are Anatmavadins, okay? But having accepted Anatma, they subsequently came up with the concept of Dharma, and then Dharma they define in terms of Swabhava. Dharma they defined in terms of Swabhava. Now that is why Nagarjuna has to address Nagarjuna has to use not the concept of Atma and Anatma. Nagarjuna is using Swabhava and Nihswabhava. So these are the two concepts. So here the Swabhava, and then the other concept is Nagarjuna is Nihswabhava. So Swabhava and its opposite is Nihswabhava. Absence of Swabhava, lack of Swabhava, non-existence of Swabhava. So these are the two concepts Nagarjuna was using. Then the question why Nagarjuna is not using Atma, because Nagarjuna is not addressing Atmavadins. Okay? Nagarjuna is not addressing Atmavadins. Nagarjuna is addressing Anatmavadins, namely Buddhist. But being Anatmavadins, they accepted some kind of Swabhava. Now, how did they come to Swabhava? Because they analyze reality into dharmas. Okay? So therefore, this distinction has to be kept in mind clearly. Now here you can see that Buddha using this term Sabbe Sankhara Anicca, Sabbe Sankhara Dukkha, but Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. So Dhamma covers, Dhamma covers everything, you can say. Dhamma covers everything. All Sankatan, Asankatan. If you divide universe into two, Sankata and Asankata, of course Asankata according to Theravada Buddhism has only one candidate, namely Nirvana. But you have everything there. So Dhamma covers everything. In the Abhidharma, which is the systematic, precise and philosophical presentation of the teaching of the Buddha, Dharma or Dhamma occurs in a technical sense, which is not found in the discourses exactly in the same manner. Now this is important. Now what is Abhidharma? Abhidharma is Dharma about Dharma. Or Abhidharma is the analysis of Dhamma. Okay? So it is given a meaning that, Abhidharma is the difficult and subtle teaching of the Buddha. It's true, but actually Abhidharma basically means Dhamma of Dhamma, or analysis of the Dhamma. Now, Abhidharma is the systematic presentation and the precise wording and the philosophical presentation of the word of the Buddha. So, what the Buddha taught has been organized, categorized, analyzed, and presented. So traditionally they understood this to be Buddhanang Samukkansika Dhammadesana, Buddhanang Samukkansika, Ukkansika Dhammadesana, the greater teaching of the Buddha. But what they really meant by this is not the ordinary speech of the Buddha, but taking the essential Dhamma out of it, it was presented. Now that is why in the Abhidhamma you don't have anything other than the basic teachings, the Dhammas of the Buddha. You don't have stories about countries and people and things like that. So it's basically that is it. So Dhamma, this concept is used in a more technical sense. Now, in the early discourses, Dhamma is used in a variety of senses, right? Including the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, Navalokuttara Dhamma, and many other things. However, in the Abhidhamma, this Dhamma is developed in the more technical sense. We will move on. What is Dharma theory still? Professor Y. Karunadasa describes Dharma theory as the philosophical cornerstone of the Abhidhamma. He has this brief publication called The Dhamma Theory, published by Buddhist Publication Society, BPS Kandy, because it is centered on this concept that the entire edifice of Abhidhamma was built. So according to Professor Y. Karunadasa, Dhamma theory is the cornerstone of Abhidhamma, because entire Abhidhamma system is based on the Dhammas. Abhidhamma is based on the Dhammas. So in that sense, you can say that Dhamma theory is the cornerstone, that like the most important pillar of Abhidhamma tradition. I mean, there will not be Abhidhamma without the concept of Dhamma. There will not be Abhidhamma without the concept of Dhamma. Now, if you take the first book of Abhidhamma, Dhamma Sangani. Now, what is Dhamma Sangani? Dhamma Sangani means the enumeration of the Dhamma. Sangani, you have the taking, the collecting Dhamma together. Sangani, Dhammas. So, entire Dhamma Sangani, you have set of Dhammas analyzed in various different ways. But the set of Dhammas you can take, without much difficulty. Okay, this is the set of Dhamma. But interesting thing is that set of Dhamma has been analyzed in so many various different ways. So Dhamma is the most important thing in the whole Abhidhamma Pitaka, and so it serves as the central conception. Now the important thing is you have to understand that here there is somewhat new development, not as it was found in the discourses. As I said, in the discourses, Dhamma is used in so many different ways to give different meanings, but here it is not like that. The overarching inquiry is subsuming both the analysis of dharmas into multiple categories and their synthesis into the unified structure by means of their manifold relationships. By causal conditioning is referred to as the Dhamma theory. Now in this, when you look at this second paragraph, overarching inquiry, I got this from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The overarching inquiry subsuming both this analysis of Dharma into multiple categories and analysis of dharmas into multiple categories, and their synthesis into unified structure by means of their manifold relationships. By causal conditioning is referred to as the Dhamma theory. Now, in this definition, you can notice that there are some several important things. Now, number one is, I would say, the analysis of dharmas. Analysis of dharmas into multiple categories and their synthesis. Their synthesis into a unified structure. Analysis of dharmas into multiple categories and their synthesis into unified system unified structure by means of manifold relationships. Now you see analysis, synthesis, relationships. By causal conditioning, of course, causal conditioning is another very important doctrinal aspect coming into here, referred to as the Dharma theory. Now, what is Dharma theory? When you try to define what Dharma theory is, these three terms are very important. On the one hand, it talks about analysis, and then it talks about synthesis, and it talks about multiple relationships. Now, if you look at carefully, entire Abhidharma is analysis, synthesis, multiple relationships. Analysis is what you find basically in the text like Dhammasangani. Dhammasangani analyzes things, right? And then, so basically analysis aspect you can see in Dhammasangani. And then if you take Pဋ္ဌာန်း, Pဋ္ဌာန်း is more synthesis of things, putting things together. And then result is ultimately the relationships. A relationship means you get a whole number of things coming together, relationships. So in other words, on the one hand, you have the dharmas have discrete, separate categories, but dharmas you never come across in your real life as discrete, separate things. They always come as bunches of things. You never have dharmas coming one by one. Now, this is something very interesting to understand Abhidharma accurately, because very often Abhidharma is misunderstood as, the analyzing the world into, discrete factors. Actually, that is not the case. In your real experience, you don't have dharmas coming separately. Dharmas are, in our real experience, dharmas are basically, they form multiple relationships in the world. Now, for example, whenever you take a particular thought, you look at Dhammasangani, it says, when you have this thought, this and this and this and this, all these cetasikas occur. Of course, it doesn't use the word cetasika. All these dhammas occur. Now, it is very interesting. With one dhamma, occurrence of one dhamma, you have whole list of things that occur. Now, just imagine who is capable of listing these things. Can we see in our experience a moment I have anger in my mind? How many other things are associated with that? Can I see that? Can an ordinary person see that? I mean, if you look at Dhammasangani list, you can see that practically more than 100 aspects are given. So, I mean, that is what is meant by relationships. So, you don't have dhammas occurring individually, discreetly, all alone. No. You have dhammas always, the forming combinations. So, therefore, this definition, overarching inquiry, subsuming both, including both analysis of dharmas into multiple categories and their synthesis into unified structure. How do you do that? By manifold relationships, by causal conditioning. Now, this is whole Dhamma theory. So, you can see how the Dhamma theory covers the entire Abhidhamma. Now, Venerables, when you look at Abhidhammatta Sangha, Chittacesika Rupa Nibbana, you may not see this emphasis. Because Abhidhammatta Sangha is, of course, the very basic entrance to the Abhidhamma literature. But I am talking here more about the canonical Abhidhamma. So if you take Abhidhamma Pitaka, what you see is, this Dhamma theory being developed, and then how Dhamma theory has been used, presented in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. Okay, so that is very important. And then thirdly, I refer to Venerable Jnanaponika Thera's statement: a complete description of a thing requires, besides its analysis, also a statement of its relation to certain other things. A complete description of one thing requires, besides its analysis, also a statement of its relationship to other things. Now, if you are given the challenge to give a complete description of one thing, you can't just only analyze it and say that, this thought has this and this and this and this and this, that will be only a list. And that will not be a complete description. In order for it to be a complete description, it has to have the combinations, relations with other. Okay? Mainly because any particular Dhamma would not exist on its own, really. Dhammas never exist all alone. Okay? So a complete description of a thing requires beside is analysis, because analysis is very important in Abhidhamma, but analysis is not the whole thing. Okay. And then it needs the whole set of relationship. Actually, when we come to this whole Abhidhamma analysis and the Abhidhamma way of dealing with reality, you can see that analysis and synthesis, analyzing things into discrete categories and also putting them together, is both equally important parts of Abhidhamma methodology. Okay, so now it is done by means of Dhamma theory. So Dhamma theory is the central theory in the Abhidhamma, and through this central theory, it gives us a picture of the universe. Universe in the sense, not the universe away from us. Actually, in another very important thing we need to understand in Abhidhamma, always the universe we are talking is our universe, our experience, not really the universe or the world or reality that existing outside us. Okay, so the universe is the lived universe, and then lived experience. I will discuss it more with you later. So the Abhidharma will give analysis or true picture of our experience. Now, our experiences are not, we don't experience discrete dharmas, we experience these things as a whole. So, that the reality has been analyzed into what is called dharmas. Now, therefore, Dhamma theory is so important for us to understand the entire Abhidhamma. And also it is important for us to understand subsequent development, how subsequent developments caused people like Nagarjuna to come up and critique it. Okay. So, okay, I will briefly, break at this point. But do you have any questions or comments about, okay, Reverend, go ahead.
I'm not clear about the Atta.
About what?
Yeah.
About
the Soul and Anatta. Because you said in the Buddha's position, because the people at that time believed in the Asma.
Yeah, yes.
Maha Asma. So because the Buddha want to negative that idea.
Right.
So the Buddha taught
Anatta.
But in the
Nagarjuna
situation, he talked about the
Swabhava. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The people which they believe.
Yeah. Do some homework on this term, Swabhava. Swabhava. Okay. Now, in fact, what I wanted to explain is that why Buddha is using the concept of Anatta, whereas Nagarjuna is using Niswabhava. Swabhava, Niswabhava, Atta, Anatta. Now, my explanation is that Buddha was addressing to a society in the 6th century BCE in India, where they were preoccupied with the concept of Atma. So, okay. But then Nagarjuna, after around 6 or 5 or 600 years later, was addressing a different group of people. Now, this different group of people were really Buddhists. Now, we know that Buddha did not have Buddhists, right? In ancient India, he did not have Buddhists to teach. Whoever Buddha teach was the originally people who are not Buddhist. We can't say Buddhist. And they were basically coming from the Brahmanic tradition in which they believed the existence of Atma. Now, Buddha found that why Buddha was worried about the concept of Atma is Buddha knew that this Atma view provide the basis for the Tanha. Because our Tanha is ultimately based on our Atma view. So not only you get rid of your Tanha, but you also get rid of your Atma view. So that was it. So therefore Buddha had to address those people with the Atma belief. However, later we are not talking about the ordinary Indians who had the Atma belief. We are talking about Anatma Buddhist. Now all these Buddhists believing in Anatma. But while believing in Anatma, they thought that the experiential universe is constituted by what are called dharmas, which have swabhava. Now that swabhava is very similar to characterization-wise to Atma. But those people who believed in the swabhava in that sense would not believe that they are believing in something like Atma, because they are Anatmavadi Buddhist. So that's why Nagarjuna's job is much more, in a way, subtle and difficult, because Nagarjuna is addressing the Buddhists themselves. Nagarjuna is trying to tell the Buddhists, look, the way you understand Dharma theory as containing Swabhava is problematic. So this is what Nagarjuna is trying to do. Now this is why Nagarjuna's job is difficult and Nagarjuna has been misunderstood. Even we have to remember that even Buddha was misunderstood. When Buddha said there is no Atma, Buddha was put into the category of Venayiko Samano Gotamo. Buddha is a destructivist. Because the other tradition that did not believe in Atma during the time of the Buddha was the materialist tradition, Uchchedavada, Charvaka tradition. Buddha was dumped with the Charvakas simply because Buddha denied that there is Atma. So even the Buddha was misunderstood. Now in the same manner, Nagarjuna is being misunderstood. Because when Nagarjuna says, there is no Swabhava. So the Nagarjuna's concept is even more subtle. Okay? So that's a more philosophically sophisticated group Nagarjuna is addressing. Buddha was addressing ordinary people in India. Of course, there were philosophically sophisticated people among them. But Venerable, that is the basic distinction between these two things, okay? So it is not only a difference between the language and the concept, also the degree of understanding is also different. None of the Buddhists was Atmavadin, these later Buddhists. They believed in Anatma. But while believing in Anatma, they were also holding this view. That is what Nagarjuna wanted to show, that look, you are doing something contradictory to the Atma theory. Okay? So, we will see in the course of reading also. Okay, why don't we take just 5 minutes break and then we get together again. All right. We were looking at these two basically key terms, analysis and synthesis. The Pali terms refer to these two Bheda and Sangaha. So you have Bheda, Bheda means breaking into pieces, and Sangaha means putting together. So Bheda is analysis, Sangaha is synthesis. The point to be understood is this. Both Bheda and Sangaha are means used in the Abhidhamma literature in order to understand the experience reality. So on the one hand, you get the experience reality which looks like a solid thing, then you want to show that there is nothing solid, nothing, the permanently, although it looks permanent, there is nothing permanent here. So for that, you analyze things into these things. Now you see, in the Dhamma from the very beginning, you see this. Now subsequently, next we will see this. The whole idea was by analyzing things into dharmas to show that there is nothing over and above or in addition to the things that have been analyzed. Now, for example, human being was understood to have an Atma. Now, the important question is, where is this Atma? So, in the Upanishadic philosophy, you have so many statements to trying to locate where the Atma is, how Atma should be understood. Now, it has been described Anor Aniyan, smaller than the smallest. Mahator Mahiyan, bigger than the biggest. And then it is in the body, in our sharira, in our body. And then finally it says, Na hanyate hanyamani sharire. When the sharira, the body is destroyed, this particular thing will not be destroyed. So you can see that, there's quite a lot of the descriptions about the location of this. And then according to one story, the father and son, the father tries to make his son realize how Atma exists. So he asks his son, this comes, I think, in the Chandogya Upanishad, I'm not sure exactly the name of the Upanishad. So he asks his son to bring, the say glass of water and a piece of a lump of salt. Okay, and then so he asks his son to drop this lump of salt into the water, and then asks him to bring it next day. Then he asked, now where is the lump of salt? Of course, lump of salt was not there. But then when you taste the water, water tastes salty. Now, likewise he said, look, Atma is pervading everything, although you cannot locate where he is. Now, similar stories you find to trying to locate Atma and to say that there is something called Atma and how difficult to locate it. Now, in other words, simply what it means is there is a mystery in us. There is something mystical in us. There is a mystery. So Atma is a mystery, right? You don't see it. But on the other hand, it is there according to their view. So when the Buddha had this analysis into Panchakhanda, we will see the main purpose was to show that there is no mystery here. You lay bare everything and there is nothing more than that. Okay. Now this is basically the idea of Bheda and the analysis. Because to show that ultimately no mystery, there is no mystery here. I will come to that point again. We will just look at the what is Dhamma, how Dhamma has been defined. Dhamma is defined as, Dhamma is one's own nature. Dhammoti sabhavu. That which holds on nature is called Dhamma. Dhammoti sabhavu. Attano sabhavang dhareti iti Dhammo. Attano sabhavang. Sabhava means swa bhava. Attano sabhavang dhareti iti dhammo. That which holds one's own nature is dhamma. So dhareti iti dhammo. Actually, there is somewhat of a etymological analysis here. Dhamma, the word as coming from Dhamma, the root as dha, to hold, bear. That was the idea, dhamma, dhareti. Indication is that the word dhamma coming from dhareti. Dhareti means you hold something, you contain something, you bear something. So that is the idea, dhamma to hold. So attano sabhavang dhareti iti dhammo. Dhamma is the one, dhamma is that which holds its own nature. Now, the idea is that when you define Dhamma in this manner, you can see that this definition makes it Dhamma, any Dhamma, unique to only to that. Because whenever you say Dhamma bears its own nature, you cannot have anything else bearing someone else's own nature, right? When you say Dhamma bears own nature, so own nature is owned by only one thing. In other words, if you take something to be Dhamma, it has its own nature. Something else, it has its own nature. So you have things having their own natures, kind of unshared by other things. So you are talking about the universe of discrete things, each having its unique character. In other words, it's something like this, saying that if I am, and if I am not you, then there must be something which makes me, not you, right? And you must have something which makes you, and not me. So we are talking about something unique. So what makes me is not shared by anybody else. So I am a unique person. I mean, this is a kind of, when I describe it in this manner, see, you can see that ultimately, this theory can be misunderstood by people ultimately. This is what really happened. Because ultimately, the theory came into, like in the Sarvastivada scholasticism, it came to believe something to be like, something like unique. But here, basically the idea was to analyze the universe into its ultimate analysis. That's the idea. So, in order to do that, the definition was given, Dhammoti sabhavo attano sabhavang dhareti iti dhammo. Dhamma is sabhava. Sabhava means swabhava. Now, swabhava can be translated in two ways. Swabhava or sabhava, one translation is nature. But if you split it swabhava, then your own nature. So that second translation. There is no other thing called Dhamma apart from the intrinsic nature born by it. Now look at the word intrinsic nature. This English word means, intrinsic means something which is only confined to you and not shared by anything else. So, this is one way to analyze the reality into discrete objects called Dhamma. So, Dhammas are being defined as things that have, their own nature, not shared by anything else. Okay? The Abhidhamma method, the Veda and the Sangha. Now, if you look at further, we will see that analysis of the experience reality, mainly by human beings, is the characteristic of teaching of the Buddha. Now you can see in the teaching of the Buddha, some of these analyses are found. There are 5 such analyses found in the discourses. I take this from Professor Y. Karunadasa's text, not that I collected these things. So, number 1 is Nama Rupa. Now, experienced reality is analyzed into Nama Rupa, right? Namancha Rupancha, Nama Rupan. Now, this is one analysis. Another analysis is Panchakhanda. Again, Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana. Cha Dhatu, 6 elements. Patavi Apo Tejo Vayo Akasa Vijnana. Patavi Apo Tejo Vayo Akasa space Vijnana consciousness. And then you have Dwadasa Ayatana. Chakkayatana, Rupayatana, Sotayatana, Saddayatana, Manayatana, Dhammayatana, and 12. And then Attarasa Dhatu, you have 18 dhatus, Chakku Dhatu, Rupa Dhatu, Chakku Vijnana Dhatu, Mano Dhatu, Dhamma Dhatu, Mano Vijnana Dhatu. So in that manner you have 18 dhatus. Now these 5 analyses are found in the discourses of the Buddha. Sometimes Buddha analyzes human beings into Nama Rupa, or sometimes into Panchakhanda, sometimes into Ayatana, Cha Dhatu, Attarasa. Now, Khanda Dhatu Ayatana, basically the 3 analyses. Khanda, analyze human being into Khandas, Ayatanas, Dhatus. Now, as I said earlier, the main purpose of this analysis was to show that there is no Atma. There is nothing hidden. There is no mystery in human being. You look at the human being is Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana. But there is nothing over and above Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana. Right? And then how are the Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana defined? Now they are defined as Rupa as Rupatiti Rupam. So there is a verb. Rupati means changes, undergoes changes. So Rupa as Rupati. Vedyatiti Vedana. Vedana means the act of feeling. Vedyati, act of feeling. Sanjanatiti Sanya. Sanya is the act of Sanjanana, perceiving things. Sankarotiti Sankara. Sankaroti, construct, formulates. In that sense, Sankara. And finally, Vijanatiti Vijnanam. Vijnana is the act of knowing, Vijanati. Now, what is the significance of analyzing Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana into actions? When you look at Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, these are nouns, right? These are nouns. Now, interesting thing is, nouns are analyzed into verbs. Now, what is the difference between the noun and the verb? Of course, we know the difference. When we talk about nouns, we assume certain things are there, over there, for us to give a name. However, when you call something in a verb, Rupati, Vedyati, Sanjanati, now what? Where are these things? Where is Rupa? When you say Rupati iti Rupam. See, the interesting thing is this analysis, interestingly, Buddha, the whole idea is you takes away the concept of solid existence of things. Ultimately what we call human being analyzed into Panchakhanda, and the Panchakhanda analyzed into web of actions, web of things that is happening. So interesting thing is, if you ask, okay, who is the human being? You can't put your finger, because human being is a series of actions that takes place, right? So, interesting thing is, the point is that you must be able to see that philosophical analysis takes away the concept of solid person. Ultimately, person is 5 khandhas. 5 khandhas are nothing other than, the whole interconnected actions. Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana. Of course, Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana doesn't exist without Rupa. Okay? And then Rupa, of course, as a material form can be existing separately, but in a human being, Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara Vijnana all come together and exist. And then ultimately, the solidly looking human being, according to this analysis, is not a solidly looking human being, just a web of actions. Now, Venerables, when I say that, of course not I, the Buddha said that, this web of actions, you don't find a person, you don't find a thing, you don't find everlasting, unchanging Atma there. When the Brahmins said, Na hanyate hanyamane sharire, when the body is destroyed, the Atma is not destroyed. Where is the Atma if we take Panchaskandha analysis? Okay? Now this is the whole thing. And then you have Dwadasa Ayatana. In the Dwadasa Ayatana, more prominence is given to the sensory experience. In the Attarasa Dhatu, more prominence is given to the Vijnana, Vijanana aspect of that. So each category, if you take, kind of emphasizes a particular aspect, okay? But all aspects ultimately analyzes the human being. Now this is what the Buddha did. Now these are important for us to understand the subsequent development of what happened in the Buddhist tradition. Because if you take Skandha Ayatana Dhatu, ultimately the view came that, okay, there is no Sattva or Pudgala, but there is what is called Khandha Dhatu Ayatana. So you can see Sattva and Pudgala kind of goes away, and then Khandha Dhatu Ayatana receives a little bit better status. Now this is how Dharma theory subsequently came into being. You can see, okay, there is no Sattva or Pudgala, right? But then there are Khandha Dhatu Ayatana, giving the impression that Khandha Dhatu Ayatana have more durability, better ontological status compared to Sattva and Pudgala. Now, this is how gradually, this idea evolved. However, analysis of experience reality, mainly by human being, has been analyzed by the Buddha in this manner. So, Buddha wanted to show that there is no something called Atma. Now, whole point of this analysis was that, to get the mystery away. Because Atma is a mystical thing. Nobody has seen that, but you believe it to be. So this is a mystery. So the Buddha takes the mystery away from this analysis. So you take Atma away, and then, okay. The purpose of this analysis is twofold, in order to show that empirical individuality does not constitute the self, as I just said. Consciousness is not a soul. 18 Dhatu analysis highlights this in particular. Now, consciousness is not a soul. This wrong idea could be gotten by people like, examples are there. Sati Bhikkhu, during the time of the Buddha, thought that Vijnanam Sandhavati Sansarati Ananyam. Right? He thought that is the Vijnana that goes. So, in other words, Sati Bhikkhu accepted Anatmavada of the Buddha. But then he thought, still, Vijnana is the one that goes from. So if Atma is not there, he thought something must be there that connects you from the next life and so on. So then he thought that Vijnanam Sandhavati Sansarati Ananyam. Now here you see the one purpose is consciousness is not a soul. So on the one hand, idea was to show that there was no soul in it. The other idea was to show that the consciousness is not soul. Each analysis shows reality in somewhat different perspective. If you take Khandha analysis, it's different from Ayatana and Dhatu. Ayatana is different from Khandha and Dhatu. Dhatu is different from Ayatana and Khandha. But ultimately, all three capture the human experience reality. Now, why do I call human experience reality? Because ultimately the teaching of the Buddha, Abhidhamma, doesn't talk about the world in general. Whole basis of talking about the world is the individual's experience world. Okay? It doesn't mean that away from our experience world doesn't exist. No, it is not the idea. But how can we talk about the world if we don't have the experience? Now, for example, I know about the existence of the external world because I hear, I see, I smell these things through my senses, right? If I don't have my senses, how do I know about the world? I don't know. Others will say that there is a world, but that's not my knowledge. So the world we are talking is the world about which we can talk meaningfully is the world we experience. But don't misunderstand, this is not to say that world is constituted by our experience or anything. But in order to talk meaningfully, we have to talk about our world or our own experience. Now, this is one thing that Panchaskandha analysis shows, So, it is the experience world. The same thing, empirical individuality. Empirical individuality means experience individuality, person who experience. So, each analysis shows reality in somewhat different perspective. Abhidhamma signifies this method of analysis found in the discourses carried to its ultimate limit. So, in Professor Y. Karunadasa's words, it is the tendency to develop a mode of analysis not amenable to any further analysis. Not amenable to any further analysis. That means Dharma analysis is final. That's the idea. Beyond the Dharma analysis, you can't analyze anything further. So the whole point of Abhidharma was to provide the analysis of reality beyond which you cannot analyze it any further. So in other words, the capture the reality of the world in its ultimate sense. Okay. Now, you may ask the question, why do you have to analyze the world and understand the world? Why do you have to do this? What should be the answer? Why do you have to do this? Why do you have to analyze? Actually, this again, you have to understand this in the soteriological context. Imagine a group of people who are trying to attain nirvana. Okay? Now, why they can't attain nirvana? Because the desire, craving, tanha. Tanha for what? Tanha for the things we see, hear, smell. Tanha is for the experience world. Right? Now, if you don't understand properly the experience world, you who are experiencing it and the world that is experienced, how can you get rid of your tanha? This is the reason why Dharma theory, why the Dhamma. Because you have to understand the experience reality as it is. Then finally you remember Buddha says to Bahya Daruchirya, Ditthe Dittamattang Bhavisasi, Sute Sutamattang Bhavisasi, Mute Mutamattang Bhavisasi, Vinyate Vinyatamattang Bhavisati. Now, Dittha, Sutta, Mutta, Vinyata. What are these things? Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Dittha means eye. Sutta, Mutta means ear, nose, tongue, and body. Vinyata means consciousness. So, that was the advice given by the Buddha to Bahya Daruchirya, Ditte Dittamatta. Now, the problem is, the origin of suffering is, through our senses, we get in touch with the external reality, and that gives us trouble. Okay? So, therefore, now I am just telling you why Dhamma theory is, why it is important for us to understand. Why this whole Dhamma theory? Because, you think that Abhidharma scholars came up with for nothing or for fun or something. No, because there was a meaning. Now, Buddha analyzed same experience reality into Khandha Dhatu and Ayatana. Now, here, the Abhidharma, the scholars were trying to understand the reality by means of the concept of Dhamma. So in that sense, Dhammas have to be comprehensive. According to Professor Vaikarunadasa's words, the Abhidharma scholasticism tried to come up with analysis of reality which is not amenable to any further analysis. Because, I mean, the whole idea is that you can go beyond Dhamma analysis of the Abhidhamma and provide another more detailed analysis. No, this is the ultimately detailed analysis of the whole thing. So that's the idea. Bheda analysis is found in the Dhamma Sangini. Sangaha is in Patthana. Now basically, I mean these are two different, two examples, but of course in the entire Abhidhamma you can see things associated with these things, except Kathavattu. Kathavattu is not really an analysis of Dhamma in this sense. Of course, it deals with the Dhamma in the doctrinal sense, but not in this sense. But if you take other things, particularly Dhamma Sangani, Vibhanga, Dhatu, Yamaka Patthana. Kathavattu is also, I'm sorry, Puggala Panyati also is another different type of word. So if you take aside Puggala Panyati and Kathavattu, all the 5 texts in the Abhidhamma are really analysis of Dhamma in many different manners. Okay. Now let me briefly give you, but of course I don't need to spend time on this. In the Theravada Dhamma, Dhamma is analyzed into 4 categories: Chitta, Chetasika, Rupa, 38 Rupas. It has to be 28, Nibbana. So the first 3 categories represent Sankhata, constructed phenomena, whereas the last is Asankhata, unconstructed phenomena. Okay. I will make the correction later. So this is basically, so don't take down Rupa as 38, as you know. So this is how the analysis of Dhamma in the Theravada. Now the interesting thing is you have Chitta, Chetasika, Rupa. Now the entire, the perceived universe was reduced to 3 things: Chitta, Chetasika and Rupa. Chitta, Chetasika and Rupa. And again, if you look at Chitta and Chetasika, that also is very interesting because Chetasika is described as Ekuppada, Ekanirodha, Ekalambana, Ekavattuka. Right? Now, if you have something Ekuppada, Ekanirodha, Ekalambana, Ekavattuka as Chetasika, can you really talk about a Chitta? Do you really see a Chitta only without Chetasika? By definition, you cannot, right? Because every time you have a Chitta, you have a Ekuppada, Ekanirodha, Ekalambana, Ekavattuka, Chetasika. So why is Chitta there then? I mean, can you ever experience a Chitta? No, I mean, the whole point is, again, this is something, of course, for you to think. Now, you can see that, I mean, in a way, we cannot talk about Chetasikas without Chitta. Because the moment you talk about Chetasika, you are referring to something called Chitta. But on the other hand, you can see that Chitta is always a particular Chitta. There is nothing called Chitta in general, right? Chitta is always a Lobha Chitta or Dosa Chitta or Moha Chitta or Kusala Chitta or whatever. But there is no something called Chitta per se or something like that, right? Although, again, you need to think, because on the one hand, the confusion is this, we talk about these things as Paramattha Dhamma. Ultimately, you reduce reality into these things. But you can see that Chitta Chetasika connection. So, ultimately you have to see that Chitta without Chetasika or Chetasika without Chitta is, impossible. But on the other hand, try to understand the relation. You have these categories, okay? So keep on thinking about these things. And then you have the Rupa. material rupa. And then this rupa also you can see Patavi, Apo, Tejo, Vayo, Mahabhuta Rupa and Upadaya Rupa. And then finally you have Nibbana as the Asankhata thing, unconstructed Nirvana. So entire universe has been understood in this manner. But now how many are there? 89, 52, 28 and 1. Okay. Now funny thing is this. Now this is what is called Bheda. But in your experience universe, you never come across any of these things as objects. Okay? You don't come across these things as objects. So that's the interesting thing. So the whole idea is that you have Bheda splitting these things just to show it, just to make you understand. But in reality, it is not how they exist. Okay? Now, Bheda and Sangha, these two things, Bheda and Sangha, we have to see, these are both the two different ways of constructing reality. But you don't have Bheda. And then putting together Sangha synthesis, of course you find in different combinations. This is something like, sometimes we use the term seeing the wood and also seeing the trees. If you see the trees, then you don't see the wood. If you see the wood, you don't see the trees. Right? But at some point, you have to see the trees. But wood is not one and one tree, right? Wood is a combination of all trees. So again, we are talking about two different perspectives. You have to see the wood. That is, of course, one way of looking at it. And at another point, you have to see the trees. But by seeing trees alone, you have not seen the wood. By seeing the wood alone, you have not seen the trees. But depending on, your function, maybe you want to do either. Let me move on. And then we have, now the Sarvastivada analysis is very important because actually it is the Sarvastivada analysis that come into the contact with Nagarjuna's philosophy. It is this philosophy that is criticized by Nagarjuna. Sarvastivada analyzed dharmas into 75, Chitta, Chaita. They don't use the word Chetasika, but Chaita. Chaita is an adjective, Tadhita. That which belongs to Chitta is Chaita. So, Chaita, Rupa material form 11. Then they have what is called Chitta Viprayukta Sanskara. Chitta Viprayukta Sanskara, constructions dissociated from mind. They are 14. And then they have what is called Asanskrita, Akasha, and I think Pratisankhya Nirodha and Apratisankhya Nirodha. There are two Nirodhas. So including all the 75 things. Now, this very term, Sarvastivada, comes from their belief that Sarvam Sarvada Asti. Sarvam, everything. Sarvada, at all time. Asti, exist. Sarvada means past, present, and future. So, everything exists through all time periods. Now, this is really the tricky point. Ultimately, because when you look at the Theravada interpretation, Theravada construction of Dhamma, you can see that Dhamma is subject to Anicca Dukkha Anatta. Okay? Dhamma is subject to, particularly, not all the Dhammas, not the unconstructed, but constructed Dhammas are Anicca Dukkha Anatta. And also constructed Dhammas are constructed, they are dependently arisen. That's very important in the Theravada tradition. However, in the Sarvastivada tradition, when they come to this belief that Sarvam Sarvada Asti, everything exists through all three times, it maybe perhaps against their will perhaps, they had to assume that there is something that persists through all three time periods. And that was the one actually that comes up ultimately producing this whole concept of Swabhava. Now there is an object, it is in the past, it becomes present, then it goes to the future. Okay? And then future to present to the past. All three time. Then what does that persist through all these three time period? Answer was given Swabhava. Now there are 4 different views attributed to Sarvastivada teachers. I'm not going to describe it right now. I mean, they try to say how this thing would persist through time. Now on the one hand, you can't accept anything like Atma, which is everlasting and permanent. But on the other hand, in order to explain how a particular thing persists through time, you have to admit something to be persisting. So, you can see philosophically difficult situation. So, Sarvastivada analysis of dharmas really has that particular difficulty because they came up to believe finally that ontologically, existentially, these things have to exist. So something has to be there. But this something is the very important thing. Whenever you have something, whatever subtle thing, maybe it is not Atma, but still it is something that persists through time, period, then that is open for interpretation. There is a difference between Theravada and Sarvastivada on their way of understanding the nature of Dhamma. It is believed that Sarvastivada exegetical text means, commentaries, sub-commentaries and the stuff, used atemporal and invariable criterion to determine what Dharma is. Atemporal means going beyond 3 time periods. Atemporal, invariable. Invariable means something that has to be there. So there is something atemporal and invariable. To determine what Dharma is, in a Dharma there is something atemporal and also invariable. Later it was understood that dharmas invariably persist through all 3 phases of time. So this is the idea. On Theravada understanding, Professor Y. Karunadasa says, just as dhammas are psychophysical events that occur dependently on appropriate conditions and qualities. Now, I emphasize, occur dependently on appropriate conditions and qualities. Their intrinsic nature rises dependently. Although you talk about intrinsic nature is dependently arisen. Now, whenever you say something is dependently arisen, Paticcasamuppannan means Aniccang, Dukkhang, Khayadhammang, Vayadhammang and so on. What is dependently arisen is subject to all these Anicca, Dukkha and all these things. So, in other words, Theravada analysis does not go against the basic Anatma idea of Buddhism, because whenever you say something is dependently arisen, you have said that it is impermanent. Okay? So there is no question of something permanent like Atma. I mean, you can talk about Svabhava, you can talk about Dhamma, you can talk about intrinsic nature so long as it is dependently arisen. Their intrinsic nature rises dependently on their conditions and qualities, rather than on substratum more real than they are. Substratum means that which underlies. So you don't have anything more real than what you are talking about. But whenever you think that there is a substratum which is more real and which is everlasting and durable, then of course you are in trouble. Okay. Now, when Sarvastivadin said that Sarvan Sarvada Asti, they were basically got into trouble in the sense because, they were postulating something to be permanent. Let me go through this. The widespread understanding that dharmas are collection of discrete and independent entities is due to generalizing what Shabatsky in early last century wrote on Sarvastivada Dharma theory. Theodore Shabatsky is a Russian scholar, world famous in the beginning of 20th century. He wrote on Dharma theory in the Sarvastivada tradition. Dharma theory of Sarvastivada tradition was, according to him, ultimately discrete entities, independent. Look at these words, discrete, independent entities. Discrete means one's own, separated by others, not connected, independent. So, according to Shabatsky's analysis, Sarvastivada Dharma theory was that. However, Shabatsky went somewhat astray because he thought that this is the general nature of the Dharma theory. He never studied the Theravada Dhamma theory deeply, or maybe not studied at all, because he had access to Sanskrit texts and those texts. So this is what happened. So what Shabatsky said about Sarvastivada Dharma theory were kind of generalized by subsequent scholars to be Dharma theory is this. But to see that scholars like Professor Y. Karunadasa has tried to show that the Theravada conception of Dharma theory is fundamentally different from Sarvastivada Dharma theory. Describing how the Dharma theory was used in Theravada, Professor Y.K. says, I'm quoting him again, it is only for the purpose of definition and description that things are artificially dissected. You dissect, you split into parts artificially, because you never find it in reality. Although you say that this chitta rises, you never find the chitta without chaitasika. You don't find the chaitasika without chitta. So in reality, you can't show, okay, this is it. You can't show it. But when you can analyze rationally into these things, so it's a kind of logical thing really. Doesn't exist in reality. Okay? Doesn't exist in reality. So it is only for the purpose of definition and description that things are artificially dissected. So you dissect something artificially just to give a definition, because each one has to be treated separately in order to say that Saddha is this, Sati is this, Hiri is this, so on and so forth. But whether these things exist independently, discrete, is an issue. In actuality, the world given to experience is a vast network of tightly woven relations. Read that sentence again, very beautiful. In actuality, the world given to experience means our experience world. What we experience is a vast network. Jala. It's a jala, it's a network. Internet. And then you have Brahmanet, Brahmajala, Dhammanet, Dharmajala. Vast network of tightly woven relations. So the tightly woven relations. So actually the relation means, again, you don't have independent discrete things. You have bunches of these things, and bunches of these things are related to other bunches of things. So that's what happens. In Theravada, dharmas are taken as discrete only for the purpose of analysis. In reality, they are always interconnected. So the Bheda is only a heuristic device or hermeneutical device to interpret and understand. You separate these things, but you don't have them separately existing. Now we will of course be dealing with this all alone. In Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Nagarjuna takes the concept of Swabhava as Swabhava, one's own nature. He does not attribute it to any particular Shravaka school, he takes it as a theory common to all later school. I mean, he doesn't discuss this Dharma theory as belonging to, he just takes the Dharma theory, but Dharma theory he is criticizing is basically the Sarvastivada Dharma theory. What we can know by his critique is that Swabhava as the characteristics of dharmas, as the characteristic, singular, of dharmas was understood as representing a permanent and unchanging reality which is not different from the characteristics attributed traditionally to Atma. Now, when you read the critique of Nagarjuna, you can see that the way Atma was understood by the subsequent people, Swabhava was understood in the same manner. So that is why Nagarjuna thinks that the Swabhava concept has to be given up. So now when we read the chapters of Nagarjuna, you can see that Nagarjuna is trying to get rid of Swabhava. Okay? Before I come to another, reading Nagarjuna with you, I will have to discuss Pratitya Samutpada, so I'll be discussing that, then we will be reading. Nagarjuna's entire exercise may be understood as an effort to show that not only dharmas has any such characteristic as Swabhava, which goes against the Buddha's teaching of impermanence. So the Nagarjuna's entire may be exercise as an effort to show that not any dharmas have any such characteristic as Swabhava, which goes against the Buddha's teaching of impermanence. Now you can see this is something very interesting. Ultimately, Nagarjuna wants to show that there cannot be anything permanent in this whole web of things. So Swabhava, if at all it is there, it too has to be anicca, impermanent. This is the whole point. Anyhow, I think I managed to give you a basic idea about what Dharma theory is, how Dharma theory is started, and the Sarvastivada Dharma theory. But this Dharma theory is, I would say, it's a very, very, very important teaching. And also it is a teaching of high sophistication. Because here we have a complete map of experience reality, isn't it? Complete map. Now, in order to make a world map, people have to go all over the world. Now, here, how the Abhidharma people did that, just sitting on a in a meditative mood, and they are analyzing the experience reality, and you have a complete map of experience reality, not the reality like outside, but Venerables, it is when you really, it is really a meditation. It's a result of reflection. How otherwise, how can you do? Now, when I read Dhammasangani, sometimes I find that in many places, Dhammasangani says, when this chitta arises, then gives a list of other things that arise. Suppose by printing mistake, one or two things are lost. Can you say those are lost? When you read it, suppose to a printing mistake, few things are lost. Can we say that these things are lost? It's enormously difficult. Unless you have a really thorough knowledge of Dhamma, you don't know, because in the list there is 120, 10 are missing, you don't know these 10 are missing there. Because to such extent, you can see this analysis is extremely thorough analysis, which is a result of deep meditation, really. Deep reflection on the Dhamma. Okay. I will wind up from that. Do you have any questions or comments? What about those people who are hiding their faces under? I think these chairs are too comfortable and too big, for a class. Okay, looks like you are taking time to formulate your questions. But please go through Dharma theory, and if you have any questions or comments, please come up later. So my next discussion on Nagarjuna will be, before going to the book, I will be talking about the Pratitya Samutpada. Today I did not talk about it. So Pratitya Samutpada as the philosophical method of Nagarjuna. And then we will jump into the text. And afternoon, please have a look at the second chapter of T.R.V. Murthy. So I will try to give you some guide questions, because otherwise I end up in talking too much, so I don't want to do that. So I want you guys to do the work. So I will give you some questions to work on, but anyhow, we meet at 2 o'clock. Okay.